So when did I know that I wanted to become a novelist? People ask me that all the time, especially when I'm on a book tour, or as we get into the Libyan diversion. People will be asking me, how many books did you write? 17 novels, and then a few nonfictions. They'll be asking me, how many novels have you written in Israel? Okay, 8. So I'm getting close to having written more novels here in Israel than I did when I lived in the United States. And they ask me lots of questions, of course, about the book and the themes in the book, and I love talking about those things. But one of the questions that people ask a lot, but it's hard to talk about on radio or in television because you get so little time, is, how did I get into writing novels in the first place? It's a challenging question to answer exactly when I knew I wanted to write novels or political thrillers. But I've always wanted to write. I've always wanted to tell stories, mainly because I don't know how to do anything else, okay? So I'll get back to that in a second. I think I can trace back my passion for telling stories to when I was 8 years old. My mom bought me a little Super 8 movie camera, and I was enthralled with that. Actually, it was an 8 millimeter. Later, I bought myself a Super 8, and I thought, wow, this is fun. So my mom's an English teacher. She was. I mean, thank God, she and my dad are still living, but they're retired. But she was an English teacher. But as much as that's true, and you would think, well, maybe that influenced me loving English and writing and books and stuff. I think it actually comes more from my dad, who had a box. He's not a writer. He's an architect, but he had a box of books up in the attic. They were the entire Ian Fleming series of James Bond novels. And I love those. They were actually fairly short, and they were very interesting, very different from the movies, but I like the movies too. And anyway, that combination probably of my mom and my dad got me interested, but making little movies with my friends and my family and in our neighborhood, that got me interested. But over time, I had little writing assignments here and there in school, and I enjoyed that. But the key is, as I grew up, I really didn't have any job skills. And this is a problem. I'm Jewish on my dad's side. I'm not Jewish on my mom's side. Okay, so growing up, I was frustrated. How come I didn't get any of the good Jewish skill sets, right? Believe me, I did not get the financial gene. Okay, I'm not your stockbroker. I'm not your hedge fund manager. I'm not your CPA. I don't have, I don't manage your money market accounts. I'm not a banker. I didn't get any of that. Okay, that's fine. But I also didn't get any of the Jewish genes, like being a doctor, or a lawyer, or running a major motion picture company, or being a chiropractor, or look, all the good Jewish jobs. I did not have those skills, and I might still be a little bit bitter. Okay, I'll concede that. But basically, as I grew up, I thought, well, I don't know how to do this, and I don't know how to do this. But I had this tension of what kind of writing I want to do. That I got affirmed for, writing. Really nothing else, but okay. I mean, I loved baseball, and I played it all through growing up and through high school, but I was I'm not particularly good at it. I played football for a season, blah, blah, blah. The bottom line is, when I wrote, people were interested, and they asked me to write for the school paper or for the local town paper. I grew up in a little tiny village in upstate New York, Fairport, only 5,000 people in this little village. And all that to say, I realized that, in a sense, God was closing all these doors that I couldn't go down because I didn't have any of those skills. And so as I thought about going to college, I thought, well, no, what do I love? There's things I would like to do that I can't, but I really love telling stories. Whether that was novel writing, maybe. It's not that I had definitely thought about it because of the Ian Fleming influence, and because I love Jack Ryan novels that Tom Clancy had written and so forth, and John Grisham novels I loved as well. But I decided to go to college for filmmaking because I thought, you don't really have to go to college for novel writing. Read some novels, write one. But if you're going to study filmmaking, then you ought to study not just the theory and the history, but screenwriting and actual the technical aspects of making 16 millimeter films and hoping to go on to 35 and 70 millimeter. So I went to Syracuse University. I got into NYU and I got into Syracuse. Those are the only two schools, film schools that I applied to. My dad, having been from Brooklyn, wanted me to go to NYU, and he took me to New York, and I thought, do I really want Greenwich Village as my campus? It was fascinating, but I just couldn't picture 4 years there. It just wasn't me. My mom, who grew up just outside of Syracuse, New York, and had met my dad in Syracuse. I was born in Syracuse. She took me to Syracuse University, where I had applied, and I liked the campus, I liked the feel, and that's where I went. Now, but all along the way, I had this sort of tension. Am I interested in documentary and news film making, or feature film, storytelling? Well, both are storytelling, but is it sort of Hollywood film or New York, Washington news film? And I really was undecided going into college, but I knew I wanted to tell stories. Anyway, all that to say, I got really very, very lucky. More precisely, God blessed me. I fell in love in my senior year at Syracuse University with, basically my college sweetheart, Lynn Myers. She became Lynn Rosenberg, and she was a creative writing English major and a Jewish studies minor. Now, I would have fallen in love with her, whatever her majors were, but those happened to be perfect for the life that God was sort of creating for us, even though we didn't really know it at the time. Now, when we got married in the summer of 1990, after we had both graduated from college, I was a year ahead of her, the question was, am I going to Hollywood to try to get into the narrative film business, or am I going to New York to get into sort of documentary film, or am I going to Washington, because news and covering the news and politics was also very fascinating to me. Well, the long story short of that was I went to Washington. We went to Washington because that's where the jobs were, and I could get a half-decent job, and she could right away. Where I thought, waiting tables in Hollywood or the expense of living in New York, it just didn't quite appeal. Well, for the next 10 years, basically my job was I was a failed political consultant, okay? Everybody that I ever worked for in politics lost, okay? Or if they did well, they did well years after I was involved in their lives, okay? So I helped Steve Forbes lose 2 presidential campaigns and about $70 million of the inheritance that he's going to leave one day to his 5 daughters. So that didn't go so well, though I love Steve and I love those years, but it didn't really work out. And, I was on Pat Buchanan's TV show once on MSNBC. They canceled it the next day. I was on Mike Huckabee's TV show on Fox once, and he retired from Fox the next day. So anyway, I was briefly, just for a few months, and in a junior capacity, I was an aide, a young aide on the comeback campaign team for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He had been prime minister from 96 to 99. He lost in 99. He was putting back a comeback team in the fall of 2000. I got hired. I didn't do that much. Don't overstate it. I obviously played no useful role because he didn't come back as prime minister for 9 more years. So really it was after that it was January of 2001, and I said to my wife, you gotta be kidding me. 10 years, okay? 10 years, I've got nothing to show for this. Like I have a little bit of savings. Well, I have a wonderful wife, and I have got 3 great kids, and we would have another one in a few years. But I said, professionally speaking, I've got nothing to show for this. And I clearly can't keep working for candidates. Basically my friends are starting to tell me, listen, why don't you work for the other candidate, the one you want to lose? If you work for them, maybe they will lose and we'll win. So, it's just, anyway, so I really was struggling. And my wife Lynn asked me, well, what have you always really wanted to do? You have a little bit of savings, you have a little bit of time. I had started a little consulting company, I'd working on some projects, but what do you want to do when you grow up, essentially was what she was asking me. And I said, well, I've always wanted to make movies or write novels, like tell stories. Making movies is very, very hard, and I wouldn't know at this point how to break out and do that. let's see, 2001, January 2001, I was like 32 years old, 33 maybe, and thinking, okay, what am I going to do with my life? So I said, you know what? I'm just going to try to write a novel. And she said, I support that, honey, but you know, let's not give up your day job of your consulting company. Why don't you keep earning an income, because becoming a novelist is a gamble, right? So basically, she said, why don't you write like 3 or 4 chapters and really grab my attention? Like, if you really blow me out of the water, then I'll think, all right, let's keep going down that track. But you need to know for yourself, are you capable of doing this, right? I mean, I told her I hardly even read novels. Yeah, Clancy, Grisham, once a year. I don't have time for novels. I live in Washington. It's crazy enough without reading fiction. I didn't really go to school for writing novels, and I wasn't an English major, so I hadn't read all the great novels in English literature, American or British or whatever. So I didn't really have anything. And I didn't have a story. I didn't have any characters. So she still loved me. And she said, well, write a couple of chapters, but grab me, you know, make me want to read more, and then we'll see, right? Okay, that seems reasonable. So in January of 2001, I sat down at my computer, and I thought, man, I don't know exactly what to do here. I had a blank screen and that cursor just staring at me. You know, I joked in a show on the Rosenberg Report with Shannon Bream, the host of Fox News Sunday, that the cursor, it has the word curse right in it. Okay, it's just daring you to fill up this thing with 100,000 words that you can sell. Look, it turns out there's a lot of people that want to write novels, and very few people are able to do it, or at least earn a living from. So the chances of me becoming a novelist were pretty small, given my lack of experience and lack of background, etc. So anyway, in January of 2001, I thought, well, I got to start typing something. So the story that started coming out of me was this. The first page put you inside the cockpit of a jet plane that had been hijacked by radical Islamist terrorists. And it was coming in on a kamikaze attack mission into an American city. Now think about this. This is almost 9 months, certainly almost 9 months before the attacks of 9/11, right? So no one had ever heard about radical Islamists hijacking a plane and flying it into a building, into a city. That was not something that, like, oh, well, sure, that everybody's writing about that. No, in January, that was fiction. That was an idea to sort of grab my wife's attention and write a couple of chapters that might wow her. Maybe blow her away was not the right term given what it was about. And so I gave the chapters to her and was sort of anxious about it because I really wanted to do this. I wanted to change my life, change my career, change the whole direction of my future, but the chances of that were pretty minimal. Anyway, we were driving on vacation, and I was driving, and she had these pages, and she thought, well, I got nothing else better to do. I probably want to fall asleep anyway, so I'll start reading your novel, Joel. All right, so she starts reading. Goes silently, but she's suddenly, so at first it's like, oh, yeah. And then she's flipping pages, boom, 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 boom. And at the end of the 3rd chapter, there's only 3, she pops up. She'd been leaning back, and I really thought she was going to drift off. And I was going to be like, hey, you know, I'm trying to write a thriller here. But anyway, she pops up straight up, and she goes, oh my gosh, you can write. And I was like, really? She goes, this is amazing. Like, we have to figure out what to do with it. I'm like, I don't know what to do with it. She goes, do you have more of a story? I've sort of roughed out a story. Well, all right, before we do anything more, I think you need to get this in the hands of someone who's actually written a New York Times best-selling book and just get their feedback. So I only knew one person at that time who'd ever written a New York Times bestseller, and that was Peggy Noonan. Peggy had been a speechwriter for George H.W. Bush. Not gonna do it. Wouldn't be prudent. Not this juncture. Not gonna do it. She'd been previously a key speechwriter for President Reagan. Well, yes, she was. And she had become a columnist for the Wall Street Journal. And anyway, she became a friend because just through my political life and hers. And so I emailed her this manuscript, three chapters. And I said, listen, Peggy, I know it's crazy, but when you have a moment, would you just take a look at it and just be brutally honest? Is there anything here? And a few days later, I get back this email. Oh my gosh, this is incredible. Oh my gosh, Joel, you can write a novel. And this is amazing. And this is going to become a big hit. And I've already sent it to my agent, my literary agent. I was like, whoa. And I tell my wife, and she's like, who's the literary agent? And so the literary agent was a woman named Joni Evans. Now, Joni was like a big, major literary agent. I think, but it's been 22 years now, so I haven't looked this up in a while. I think she had been the head of Random House for a while. She might have even edited The Godfather. But anyway, she was a big deal in New York in the literary agent circles. Okay, I'm like, wow, okay. And Peggy says, I sent it to Joni, and she's going to love it, and she's going to send you an email back, and she's going to represent you, I think. I was like, wow, okay. A few days later, I get an email from Joni Evans, and Joni says, wow, this is really good. Peggy's not wrong. It's good, but I only represent women. So you need Tom Clancy's agent. I turned to Lynn, I'm like, well, sure, I need Tom Clancy's agent. I'm like, Tom Clancy was the biggest thriller writer of the age. Like, yeah, I'm never gonna get, whatever. She goes, but Joni writes in the email, I've already sent it to him. You're gonna get a call. I'm like, okay. And a few days later, I get a call, not from Robert Gottlieb, the super agent he used to be called. He was Clancy's agent, but he had a deputy, a guy named Scott Miller. And Scott called me and said, this is good. Can you send me the rest? I said, Scott, there is no rest. I'm just spitballing here. I don't have anything. He goes, well, get on it. This is really good. And if you continue this novel, which I was calling The Last Jihad, if you get this thing done and it holds up, we will definitely represent you. I'm like, oh my gosh. So that is how things got started. So I moved off clients and, begged out of contracts and just got focused. And I took 2001 to write The Last Jihad. Now, the story begins with a kamikaze attack on an American city by radical Islamist terrorists, and it leads to a fictional American president deciding, because of those attacks, that he has to go on offense to eradicate radical Islamist terrorist cells all over the Middle East and remove Saddam Hussein from power in Iraq. Now, I was actually finishing The Last Jihad on the morning of September 11th, 2001. I didn't have the TV on. I didn't have radio on. I was, jeans and a T-shirt, just writing, trying to get this novel done. I was just a few chapters away from being totally done. Lynn had dropped off the kids at school, and she heard on the radio on the drive home from that little Christian private school about these attacks in New York. And by the time she got home, she said, you won't believe it, turn on the television. And we saw these attacks. We saw the video replays. We saw the towers go down. We then learned about the attack on the Pentagon in our own city of Washington, D.C., and the day went crazy, and the whole country came to a screeching halt, and we were at war. We didn't know with whom yet, but I will say in the days that followed, I wasn't thinking, it's too bad my novel's coming true. I didn't think about that at all. But after about a month or two, as just dealing with the crisis as it was, as a Washingtonian, I did realize there's no way to sell this novel. I've spent my entire year, 9 months on it, and you can't. What am I going to do? Send this manuscript to a publisher based in Manhattan, who's been going through this horrible, this horrific crisis in Manhattan? It's not entertaining anymore. It's cruel. So I threw the manuscript in a drawer, and I was like, wow, honey, I know God has bigger fish to fry. He doesn't really care as much about my failed novel writing career on top of everything else, but I really don't know what to do. We're almost out of money. and there's no way I can sell this novel. And as it happened, a few months later, President George W. Bush gave a speech, the State of the Union speech, in late January, early February 2002. And in that speech, as you may recall, he gave the famous line that we face an axis of evil. And he talked about Iraq, Iran, and North Korea. And he intimated pretty strongly, in my view, that we might have to go to war with Iraq. Well, my agent, Scott Miller, called me the next day and he said, "Joel, do you work for the CIA?" I'm like, "No, what are you talking about?" He goes, "Sure. You write a novel about radical Muslims hijacking a plane, flying it into an American city, and that leads to a war with Iraq to remove Saddam Hussein from power because of his connection between terrorism and weapons of mass destruction? And you're telling me you don't work for the CIA?" I said, "Scott, I'm just making this stuff up. No, I don't work for the CIA." And then he said, "Isn't that what you'd have to tell me if you did work for the CIA and you just couldn't tell me?" I'm like, I said, "Dude, Scott, I don't. But what are you trying to get at?" He goes, "I think everything has changed. I think there's an appetite now to understand who we're up against and how we're going to go stop these bad guys and bring them to justice." I said, "Okay." He goes, "So I think we need to take your manuscript and probably put in a little element near the beginning that you acknowledge that 9/11 has already happened and this is a second wave of attacks, but let's get this manuscript out there and let's get a book deal." I'm like, "Are you serious?" And that's what happened. And in November of 2002, the novel released, The Last Jihad released. It hit #1 on Amazon.com. It spent 11 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. I was interviewed on over 160 radio, TV shows, print interviews, and so forth. And suddenly, I had a career. I hadn't meant to be prescient. I hadn't meant to be sort of predicting what was going to be happening. And but I'd gotten a little too close, chillingly close to what had really happened. And people were like, where does this come from? That'll be another discussion. I'll do another video on kind of where these ideas come from. But that's how I started being a novelist. And look, that's not exactly a replicable model. So when young people especially, or people of all ages say, I've always wanted to write a novel, it's been my dream, I don't really tell anybody, but how do I do it? How do I do what you do? I don't really know exactly what to tell them. A lot of it was prayer. We were praying as myself, my wife, our 3 sons, "Lord, give us a new direction and give us a story, give us an agent, give us a publisher. Let me, and so I believe that God is a prayer hearing and a prayer answering God, a God who works wonders, a God who answers prayer. He doesn't have to say yes to every prayer we pray, but sometimes our crazy ideas are from Him, and He wants us to go down that track, and He certainly did with me. I wish that in all those years when I was helping people lose, and I was running out of money, and I was going nowhere, and I was frustrated and discouraged, I wish He'd whispered, "By the way, someday you'll sell 5 million copies of your books. Your novels will be read by former President George W. Bush. They'll be read by Vice President Mike Pence and Secretary of State, CIA Director Mike Pompeo. They'll be read by King Abdullah of Jordan, all kinds of other people, as well as just, rank and file, salt of the earth, regular people who are looking to be entertained as well as educated." That's how I got into it. And it turns out one novel led to another. But I want to just say this. Writing a novel is a crazy career. Like, it doesn't make sense. And that's why it doesn't work for most people. I can only tell you it's the grace of God that I am a novelist today, as well as, that success has brought other opportunities like doing the Rosenberg Report, doing All Israel News, All Arab News, starting the Joshua Fund to bless Israel and her neighbors, and other projects. That success has led to other opportunities, and I'm very grateful. But I go back to the idea that the idea of being a novelist is crazy. You're trying to persuade people to spend $28 on something that's completely made up? Right? That's an odd value proposition for work, right? You build something, you build a house, that's a value for somebody. You are a doctor and you know how to heal people, wonderful. You're a fireman, that's a job. Making things up for a living and trying to get people to spend $28 on it, that's crazy. Now, I'm Jewish, I would never spend retail. I would never pay $28, but I'm grateful for the Gentiles that do pay retail so that I can put my kids through college and so forth. So anyway, that's how I got started writing novels. I'm excited about the Libyan diversion. You be the judge, but I think it's actually the most exciting thriller that I've written, certainly in the Marcus Riker series. And we'll see. I definitely look forward to your feedback. Good, bad, ugly, brutal. It's okay. I can take it. In fact, my kids over the years have loved reading the worst reviews on Amazon or wherever. They look for them, and then they're like, "Oh, Dad, this guy really scorched you." I don't have a problem with that because I'm grateful for what I get to do, and I'm grateful that you took a few minutes to be curious about what I do, and I hope that you'll enjoy the Libyan diversion. And if you haven't read the rest of the Marcus Riker series, I'll just say this. I'll close with this. You can certainly read the Libyan diversion as is. You don't have to have read the others, but you'll enjoy it much more if you double back and go through the Kremlin conspiracy, the Persian Gamble, the Jerusalem assassin takes place right here in Jerusalem. It's amazing that title, it seems to fit, and the Beirut Protocol about a kidnapping on the Israeli-Lebanon border. Anyway, thank you so much. I'm so grateful that I get to do what I do, and I hope you find the Libyan diversion and the other books interesting and encouraging for you, your family, and your friends. I'm Joel Rosenberg in Jerusalem. God bless you.